Hello everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So I very vividly remembered when they announced that it was Daniel Craig who was going to take over the James Bond franchise. And my first reaction was, him? From Layer Cake? Well, okay then. Because when they announced that, the guy from Remington Steele was going to be James Bond, I was like, huh? Who's that guy? But in the end it worked. I think that is the genius of, casting the James Bond film, because they don't cast the people you think they're going to cast. They're going to cast the people you need. Even though I don't look as fondly as the Daniel Craig James Bond films as I do with the other ones, even though they're very well produced and they're very well made. There is this little disconnect between them and me. The thing is that I understand that you want to make James Bond a little bit more realistic. I understand you want to make him a little bit less horny and, that you want to add realism to the whole thing. But James Bond is escapism. The thing is that this is what sets him apart from other action stars. This is what sets him apart from other secret agents. He is a level above the other ones. He has the wacky gadgets. He has all of these weird stuff, and he gets the girls, multiple girls per movies in some cases, and that's fine. And another thing in hindsight that I didn't like about this movie is the fact that they wanted to give James Bond an entire arc. This was going to be a continuation over basically 5 movies, or at least they pretended that was the case. I don't know if they planned this ahead, but that was basically what they ended up doing. I didn't like that, because James Bond for me was the greatest TV show that has ever been made. You had, the Monster of the Week, and that was your James Bond film. It was very rarely referenced in other movies. They did that from time to time, that they, talked about, one thing or two that might have happened in previous James Bond films. And the fact is that that sort of worked, but, doing a continuation of a story, that was like, but why? It's dumb. At this point, you're probably thinking that I'm gonna give this movie a bad rating and I'm going to rag on it a lot. I'm going to rag on it a lot, but I'm not going to give this movie a bad rating because this is a really good movie. The problem is that I think it is also a bit overrated. People have been hailing this movie as the greatest James Bond film of all time, and I can't understand why. It has some fantastic moments, it has some great characters, but in the end, this movie was too much with too little. Let's find out what those were, shall we? This is Casino Royale. But before we begin, a little history lesson. Casino Royale is based on the book Casino Royale, which is the first book about James Bond, which also was the first sort of version of James Bond that's ever been released, because there was this TV movie that was released in the 1950s. I can't quite remember who played James Bond, but that was the first attempt of making a James Bond, so I think it was a good idea to try to use that story, because this is sort of a soft reboot, because in this movie James Bond hasn't actually gotten his 00 status yet. He actually gets his 00 status in the opening of this movie, which I think was kind of ingenious. And after that, James Bond, however, gets a little bit sidelined after shooting up an embassy in Madagascar, of all places. And after that he goes to the Bahamas, and slowly but surely focuses in on a man called Le Chiffre, played by Mads Mikkelsen, who is kind of a terrorist banker who has recently, because of Bond, lost millions of dollars, which he didn't have. Le Chiffre has basically gambled with his clients' money, and now he has to win them back in a high-stakes poker tournament in Montenegro. By the way, this movie was released 6 months after Montenegro had their referendum and had voted to become an independent nation. How late did they decide to go with Montenegro as the location for James Bond? It's not, by the way, shot in Montenegro, it's shot in the town of Loket in Czech Republic, but that you probably already know. So this is basically James Bond is going to play cards against Le Chiffre, because if he beats him, he will have nowhere to go and they can, get all his clients and stuff like that. But this is the thing that always bothered me about this setup. I think this setup is the most ludicrous thing in a James Bond film outside going into outer space. Because he is already broke. He already has basically nowhere to go. And he has to win this so he can basically, pay back his clients. So if they go ahead with this, they will inadvertently give him a chance to redeem himself. Why don't they just arrest him right now because he has nowhere to go and, evil African warlords are after him? He is already almost out of options. Maybe somebody has a good explanation for this, but I sure as hell couldn't find that. By the way, James Bond isn't going into Montenegro to play cards alone. He also has Vesper Lynd with him, played by Eva Green. And they have absolutely wicked chemistry together, and that is great. The problem is that it takes so long for Eva Green to show up. She is one of France's best actresses of all time, so good for them. This movie is, by the way, a little bit weirdly structured. After 2 hours I thought, well, this was a rather good James Bond film, and wait, what's that? We're going on? We're introducing new characters? We're doing this and this? Okay. It was an underwhelming way to end a movie that was sort of ended in an underwhelming way already. The problem with this movie is also the fact that it is 144 minutes long. It is too much. And you have also not filled it with enough exciting things, because playing poker can sometimes be exciting, but most of the time it isn't. I also thought that the entirety of the poker game was a little bit weirdly structured, because we see that the markers that the players have are constantly changing. So they have been playing, but we don't know who's gaining and who's losing and stuff like that. Felix, that is played by Jeffrey Wright in this movie, shows up and says that I'm bleeding chips. We have never seen you actually play almost anything in the entire movie. So they're trying to cram in this very big sequence with the card things in this already too long movie. And we don't have any memorable action sequences. I like the parkour jumping in Madagascar when they jump from crane to crane to crane and running through walls and stuff like that. That was fun. But apart from that, we don't really have any really memorable action sequences. The thing in Miami Airport was fine, but apart from that, it is a stop-start way of making the movie. But I really like Daniel Craig as James Bond. He has a physical presence about him, a danger about him. If he was coming towards me with evil intent, I would run away until I died or he catch me, whatever happened first. I really believed him as a unhinged secret agent. But the thing is that they've also kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater when they removed all the gadgets and all the things that made James Bond such an iconic character, as I said in the beginning. Timothy Dalton proved that you could make James Bond more realistic but still have him be this over-the-top agent with all these gadgets and stuff like that. It could work. The other attempts of making James Bond into more of an actual person, we don't need that. We don't want that. We just want to have our escapism. God damn it. Mads Mikkelsen could have been a fun James Bond villain, but he has too little screen time that he really matters that much. And also, the way things ends for him is a little bit... I thought to myself when I saw that the first time, well, that was very anticlimactic. That's it? That's it? But I've ragged enough about this movie. There are some fantastic sequences in this movie. I still think that the poker sequences actually kind of works in the final stretch of the whole thing. The acting is fantastic. Judi Dench is fantastic. Eva Green is fantastic. Daniel Craig is fantastic. Mads Mikkelsen is fantastic. They form the awesome foursome that this movie is kind of built on. The sequences in Madagascar is fantastic. The movie looks great, fantastic cinematography, and the movie is so well produced that you don't really mind the fact that this movie in some cases are a bit boring, because it's so elegant, it is so flawless in its execution. This movie just has so much class to itself, and it looks so great that you don't mind that it is merely just, empty calories. I really went back and forth when I rewatched this movie. On the one hand, this movie is too long. This movie has too many slow parts to it, but Daniel Craig is just so good and the story itself is so fascinating that I can't help but giving this movie 72 points. This movie can be frustrating to see from time to time, but the emotions are just running so high that you kind of overlooks that in favor of the great moments, and the realism actually helps this movie in some form or fashion, and I love the ending. The ending is so great. So I'll see you next time for so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.